We are live, Beena. We are live. We are
Hello
live.
and welcome to Moreness-Culture. Good morning, Sil. Good morning, Brain. And good morning to everyone who is going to watch us live and will join us, of course, will watch us recorded later. Thank you so much for being here, Sil. How are you?
Hello, Beena. Hello, Beena. It's good to be
You
here.
need
We're
to
a
fix
little,
your corner. Uh,
yeah. It's
anyway,
just
no
not
problem.
wanting to
No
be that
problem.
way.
It's all good. Okay, so while Sil is busy doing sharing on all the platforms we are now using, including TikTok, Instagram, Substack, YouTube, Facebook, yes, you name it. Okay, all the popular one at least. We are sharing the Moreness and the Moreness culture here. What we are busy
Uh,
doing right nowadays is we are doing the capital R reading of Carlos Castaneda's works about Don Juan. And this is something, it's a long, huge project. But more than then of like, okay, yes, it's going to be very long. But in every single reading, and especially when you are doing capital R reading. Capital R reading is a term of way of impeccability and Moreness-Culture. We use it for a specific process of learning, capital L learning. It is not just reading a thing, it's learning, and learning involves so much more than just reading something. So it's a very sophisticated and a very comprehensive concept from way of impeccability, and just this one concept can transform so many aspects of your life. I cannot say that okay, it is going to transform
uh,
everything and every aspect, but yes, it helps a lot when you build this ability or acquire this skill to do the capital R reading. You can implement this in any, you can apply this in many different aspects of your life. You can do capital R reading of people, circumstances, situations, perspectives, yourself, universe, world around you, and world within you. You can do capital R reading of anything and anyone. And of course, it is going to give you so much more value than expected, than obvious. And this is what we are doing. We are going beyond obvious, with a very specific intent to connect with Don Juan, connect with his intent of sharing, because so far, what I am just reading, what I understand, and of course, because Sil has shared many times, like continuously, regularly, that Don Juan was sharing. He was not using a specific vocabulary for that, but we can see, we can understand the intent that he was sharing. And even if he was not doing that, we need to make it in that sense that it is sharing. It is not something like instructions coming down to you and you have to follow. Yes, for some specific, in some special situation, yes, you can. But other than that, sharing is the concept. Sharing is the main focus of this. And this is what we are learning. And yesterday and day before, yes, like okay, in previous chapters, recent previous chapters, um, what we were reading is about will. And this is something still I'm not
yeah.
getting it fully because it is very I can see that okay, it's a very complex understanding. And to have this, because to understand will, first you need to understand that it is possible. And my mind
Yeah.
is not getting into that. Okay, is it possible really? That's the
Yeah.
thing. So first you have to have the trust and the understanding that this type of concept does exist, and
Yeah.
then you can
Yeah.
go into details, and this is what we are doing. And I'm so thrilled about this, the concept of will, and so many nuance concept coming into while reading. So far Don Juan seems like a very chill person, and doing a lot of sharing a lot of nuances in a very casual way. But as a conventional mindset, we get into that, oh, what he's sharing about medicine only, they are also profound, but our focus is going beyond that, not just
Yeah.
focusing on medicine or medicinal plants and other things, but going beyond that, what we can do without medicine also. Because connecting Don Juan with medicine is actually limiting him.
Oh, very much.
Yes,
Yeah. Or
because
with
if
drugs more than medicine,
yes,
because it's not really for
yes,
health purposes. Yeah.
yes. So drugs. If we do like, okay, if one person, if anyone who doesn't have access to these drugs and they don't want to, then what we are saying is Don Juan has nothing to share with them,
Yeah. But no,
which
he's
means
got a
that
lot.
okay, it's not
He's got a
useless,
lot
but it
to
has,
share.
yes, he has a lot more than just drugs.
Oh,
So
yeah.
this is
Yeah.
this is what we are trying to connect with, and I hope that still you are done with all your sharing.
I am almost done. One
Okay,
second. Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good. And while Sil is doing all these things, if by chance you find this video and live, please do connect with us and share your thoughts about it. And even if it is not connected to Don Juan or his sharings, you can share anything, whatever you like to, what you're interested in. So please do share, because sharing is very 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 valuable for us, and we
Yeah.
really treasure that. And Sil is working like he's in a spaceship or something.
Well, I'm just trying to trying to
Swimming.
get
Okay,
my
perfect.
my camera
Yes, perfect.
sorted, which it did get
Yes,
sorted. So there we go. All right. So
yes. Okay,
we're
okay.
ready. We're ready. We're ready. The
Yes.
camera has an AI feature which zooms itself in and out, but it doesn't really work for me. It's because of my green screen and everything. So it just makes it complicated, and it turns it off for unknown reasons, and then it's quite difficult to get it back for unknown reasons once again. So who knows? Who knows? Just strange but true. So we're going to go back into this reading now of continuing on about will, and also seeing, or perceiving, sorry, perceiving energy directly. And this was a very cool part that we're on, because Carlos is smoking the smoking mixture again, and in that he perceived the energy directly of Don Juan's face, right? Which was this movement and life and stuff going on inside there, and it's just energy, right? But it's all like movement inside the sphere that's more or less this face, right? Now this is very, very cool. And also he wanted him to learn to walk using his will. So it's a combination too of the perceiving and the will all together, right? And let's screen share and continue reading. And let's see what's going
Okay,
on with
so
TikTok.
yeah, you have to continue reading today because I have a very noisy background, and not for you, but for me
Uh,
it is very disturbing. So please
yeah,
continue.
yeah. Well, it's a very alive, which is nice to see and yeah, just
And Joseph, hello Joseph. He made a comment, so you can respond to that,
oh,
Joseph.
very good, very good, very good, very good. Native Americana have fewer words than English. A good example is the word medicine. It has a multitude of meanings. Yes, yes, I'm aware, Joseph. And, in English too, medicine has a broad range, but typically it's more connected to health. And in this case, the power plants here, it's a focus that Carlos inappropriately overemphasizes. And it's later we're going to see it's only with Carlos that Don Juan uses it so much, because Carlos is this plugged up fool, as he calls him. And he needs this. But the other apprentices, they don't, right? And Don Juan says that he'd prefer not to use this because it's very expensive on the body. So we have to take the thing into its totality here and understand it appropriately. That's why I keep emphasizing, and that the power plants, the drugs, in other words, the hallucinogens, they are overly inappropriately emphasized by Carlos, and it gives a distorted view of Don Juan and what he's doing with Carlos. We're going to see in the next book when Carlos realizes that he's made a mistake and that he's inappropriately emphasized the drugs and the hallucinogens and things because he was in the 60s, that was the era. 60s, early 70s, drugs were the thing. They were a big deal, right? They were just like, ooh. But he missed the whole warrior's way, and we're going to go into that in the next book, right? So there's this inappropriate emphasis that we have to be careful. And the focus, the most important part of Don Juan's teachings to Carlos is not about the power plants. Absolutely not. And Don Juan will make this very clear later on, right? And he says, without impeccability, this is pointless, right? But learning to perceive directly, if you learn to perceive directly, he says, this is now a whole different ball game, right? Uh, but you still need the impeccability for that. Now, very interesting, very interesting. So we just don't want to lose our perspective here and get caught up in that because it's very easy to assume that this is the focus of Don Juan's teachings, and it's not, right? And Don Juan will make that very, very clear later on, right? He'll really clear up this misunderstanding about it. All right, let's continue reading and see because it's very interesting stuff that comes now in terms of uh, of just this perceiving energy directly and will, right? And again, this both together, perceiving energy directly and will, these are two transformative conceptions, transformative understandings, transformative new ways of understanding the world and how it works, right? And that it's like Beena said, this is a new thing that's not part of our typical understanding. Neither of these, for me, ever was something that I doubt the existence of, particularly will, because I've experienced it myself. So I know this is something that is there for sure. And likewise, perceiving energy directly. Uh, this is something that I also do not doubt, even though my experience is not the same as well. I don't really have a depth of experience there. I have perceiving, yes, I have one profound experience which qualifies, as we'll later see, in a different direction. So to me, these aren't things that I doubt. I just take them for granted as existing. Um, and, it's not just from my own experience, but also from the wealth of other supporting literature and evidence elsewhere. Uh, right. Joseph says, most people I know, including myself, are super plugged up. We need their plant medicines to have a chance to heal. Yes. Unfortunately, this is because our society and the culture that we grow up in, the superiority paradigm culture, it is geared towards plugging us up. Everything about it leads to plummet, which is why I share Moreness-Culture all the time, right? And Moreness-Culture is somewhat of an antithesis to the superiority paradigm and to plugged up culture. And part of Moreness-Culture is way of impeccability. Not just impeccability itself, but way of impeccability, which has all of the other factors involved that are there really to unplug us. Yes, clarity of intent to start with, understanding association management, living in attunement, all of these things and much, much more, right? The way of impeccability has got a lot of depth to it. All of this is there to take us out of the superiority paradigm and shift us into the Moreness paradigm. It's shifting the core intent of what we think we should be doing. In superiority paradigm, we always jockeying for position. That's the basis of this. We don't even realize we're doing it, right? It just happens automatically. And of course, that's a major plug. It's a major battle. Look at Don Carlos. We see this in Carlos. He has this too. How he's comparing himself. He's the sophisticated guy, intellectual, and Don Juan is an Indian, but he's the conflict. Of course, Don Juan knows a lot more than him. He's a way better person than Carlos. He's got his life together. He's more sensible. But Carlos struggles with this, right? Because of the habit of the superiority paradigm thinking, yeah, and all of the other things that come with it, the limitations, assuming intellectual, like where we said just up, right? Thinking just the intellectualness would be enough, right? That's why don't call me an intellectual. It's got to be practical. If you understand practical, when he said, oh, up, no, you have to feel up, you have to intend up, you have to have the motivation to go up, right? Intent, right? Again, when you understand intent, it will lead you to will. Will is just the local practical application of the greatness of intent. You need intent to have will, right? You don't necessarily have to have will in order to intend, but certainly the reverse. All right, so all of this all works together, yeah. Big parts of Don Juan's world, says Joseph. Big parts of Don Juan's world include separate realities. I know no better path to them than plant medicine. Right, yeah. Now this is very important to also understand, right? That the separate realities, it's again something that's overemphasized by Carlos. Yeah. But right here in this whole incident that we talked about, right, just before this, there was the connection with the guardian, and Carlos did not get past the guardian. And now when he's taking the smoking mixture, he asked Don Juan, we read this yesterday, he said, are we going to do the guardian? He said, no, that's over. That path is closed. It's off. It's done. Right? And therefore, that particular separate reality, the world that the guardian lets you into, this is just a non-issue anymore. It's just gone, right? Because the separate realities is also something that Don Juan says later on is not an important focus. It's a path that you can take, but it's a path that is really fraught with getting involved in all of that separate reality stuff. The particular separate realities, there are many of them. The particular separate reality, which is the sorcery world, the world of spirits and all of the things that go with that, and the magic and all of that stuff that goes with it. Yeah. Because that's a superiority paradigm world, and it's very dangerous, right? As Don Juan said, your soul can get taken by another brujo and all of this other stuff. It's very dangerous. So again, it is a misplaced emphasis by Carlos. He called the second book, the one we're reading now, is called A Separate Reality, implying it's important. It's not. The key point that is important is to have impeccability, to live like a spirit warrior. This is the crucial point. Now, it's again, the emphasis of Carlos is misplaced because he is looking back at things as an author and pulling from his notes what he thinks is important. But when he gets later on in the third book, he goes back over his notes and say, oh my God, I missed everything. Right? So we have to be very, very important here. And this particular point of the separate realities is a dangerous point. I know personally people who have, gone on retreats and they've taken medicine plants and all sorts of stuff and explored this wonderful world because, yes, there's a lot to explore. It's like nature, right? But the wild nature is like going into the jungles of South America. You can wander around there for a long time before encountering any danger. But that doesn't mean that it's not danger available, right? And in this, I know personally people who have had substantially really serious incidents where, some of them were for months afterwards, they were debilitated physically, right? From the experience that they had, which was a negative experience. An attack, they were attacked, right? So we have to be very, very careful. Of course, there's value there, like exploring the jungle, there's value there, but it's a dangerous value. Here's the point, though. There's no necessity for it. Don Juan is going to make this very, 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 very clear. It is a path that's part of his legacy and his history, but there's no necessity for it whatsoever. Right? That's very important to understand. Yeah. Then Joseph goes on to say, and I've done many other practices a little extreme, as most native spiritual practices are. The practices you up to really benefit from the plant medicines. They give you a boost you need. Yes, but this is also, Joseph, we don't need that boost necessarily, right? There are other ways to go to it. Yes, like in Carlos's case, he was an extreme. But what about the other apprentices? They didn't need it, right? So we have to be careful of assuming we need this. First, do everything else you can, and then if you're still plugged up, fine. But mostly in our world, we don't have access to Way-of-Impeccability. It's just not there, right? It's not that I'm aware of, at any rate. So, yes, it is available through Don Juan and Carlos, as we're going to see in the next book. The problem with these books is that because of Carlos's emphasis of the power plants, it's a distorted assumption of what's important, and we have to change that. That's why I keep reaffirming this. We have to get over this implied assumption that the power plant's a separate reality. This is the important thing about the Don Juan books. It's not. It's absolutely not. Yep. And we're going to see more of this. Yeah. Again, this whole point of the medicine world and the spirit world and the alternate realities, it is a very, very dangerous trap. I keep emphasizing this. Yes, it is available. Yes, it is valuable, but it's also a very dangerous trap because you can assume it's the be all and end all, and then you get involved in all of that, like the sorcerers of old, and they went nowhere. And we're going to see this in Don Juan's lineage. He's going to talk about this, where he has the new seers, right? The lineage shifts, where they disconnect from this whole sorcery, this medicine world, the spirit world, the alternate realities, because they realized it's a dead end. Yes? As valuable as it is ultimately a dead end. And it's a mistaken belief of this is where it's all at. No, it's not where it's all at, right? There's more. You can go past that. You can go beyond that. And that's the real prize of true freedom. Does not have to go via that path, right? And that path is actually quite detrimental to that because it can easily catch you up in the bubbleness of it and make you think this is where the end all is, and then you get stuck there, right? This is very, very, very key to understand this, right? I look at the totality always, overview perspective, and I never forgot this. For me, when I first started reading, the whole power plant thing was never of interest. I was interested in the teachings in terms of impeccability. That's what always grabbed me. So I never got caught in that, and I was very, very happy that I never did, right? Because at least I had my own sensibility to not let me get caught up in that. But it's very, very easy to get caught up in this, right? The universe helped me. Yeah, yeah. Yes, you have to find your own medicine, but you have to also be careful of your assumptions of what is available and what is ideal. Yeah, that's the problem. There are many paths. Of course, this is a path, but just because it's a path, it doesn't mean it's a viable path, or at least it's viable, but it doesn't mean it's an ideal path. It's not. It's a dangerous path. That's the point. And it's a path that can easily lead one to get lost in it. And that's the danger. That's the danger. And also you spend a lot of time and energy learning all the stuff. To what end in the end of it? And that's the new seers, as Don Juan's lineage has come to be, the more recent part of it. They came to realize this and said, no, let's just skip all this other nonsense stuff. It's just this whole lot of learning and huff and puff about all sorts of stuff. To what end? Let's just go right to freedom itself, real true freedom, right? Yeah, discipline. Yeah, it's set and setting discipline. It's not putting mushroom on your pizza and grabbing the beer. Yeah, exactly. It's appropriate focus, in other words. And that's the key. That's why appropriateness, this concept that I bring to philosophy in general, appropriateness is so transformative, because if you don't keep appropriateness in mind in reading Carlos and listening to Don Juan, one can easily get lost, which Carlos does. Carlos does not keep the overall appropriateness in mind, and he gets these misunderstandings, right? And I want to avoid this, Joseph. I really want to avoid this, right? The power plants, it's interesting, but it's only there as a uniqueness to Carlos specifically. It's fascinating because it shows us this world, but we must always keep this in mind. And I think it's a test by the universe to say, really, are you going to listen to what is actually presented to you? Are you going to be paying close and careful attention? Are you going to be paying attention with capital D, discernment, which says I must set aside what is being pushed at me? and I must make allowance for the uniqueness of the situation, right? That's very, very important. All right, so let's continue here, right? Because if we, the value of this is that we get to hear Carlos's perceptions through of capital P perceiving. We get to hear his connecting to will, and we get detail that we would not otherwise have if Carlos was sensible, and we wouldn't learn a lot of things. Here, the detail, right? So it's very helpful in that sense, right, Beena? Right. So to me, Joseph says the end is to get unblocked to heal. From my perspective, in Moreness-Culture perspective, Way-of-Impeccability perspective, we start from an entirely different perspective. We say, it's not about fixing you that you're broken. You're not broken. You're just caught up in a world, a language, a bubble. You can just let go of all that and start fresh, and just shift out of it, and start with the understanding that you are already good, you are already okay, you are already more. Just connect to your own moreness, right? And then learn the skills and techniques: clarity of intent, association management, self-conception, all of the tools that are in Way of Impeccability, and you just start doing them. And then it's not about getting unplugged, because you're out of that system. Get into another system where you start fresh and clean and pure, and build the tools for that. Very simple to do. Very simple to do, right? Yeah, yeah, right. But Carlos is unique. We must not assume that most are like Carlos. They are not. The other apprentices, and there are a whole bunch of them, right? None of them needed this. They're ordinary people too. See? So we have to be very, very understanding this. Yes, the medicine, as you say, of Carlos. Yes, fine. But Carlos is unique, very, very, very unique, as we're going to see later on, right? So we cannot make this a generalization. Absolutely not. The generalization is not Carlos, because all the other apprentices, not a single one of them needed this. Yeah. All right. So let's read here, right? Uh, Although I could not feel my steps, I must have walked toward him, because I moved. Don Juan came to me smiling and held me by the armpits. His face was very close to mine. Good work, he said reassuringly. At that instant, I became aware that something extraordinary was taking place right there. I had the feeling at first that I was only recollecting an event that had taken place years before. At one time in the past, I had seen Don Juan's face at very close range. I had smoked his mixture, and I had had the feeling then that Don Juan's face was submerged in a tank of water. It was enormous, and it was luminous, and it moved. The image had been so brief that I did not have time to really take stock of it. This time, however, Don Juan was holding me, and his face was no more than a foot away from mine, and I had time to examine it. When I stood up and turned around, I definitely saw Don Juan. The Don Juan I know definitely walked towards me and held me. But when I focused my eyes on his face, I did not see Don Juan as I am accustomed to seeing him. Instead, I saw a large object in front of my eyes. I knew it was Don Juan's face, yet that knowledge was not guided by my perception. It was rather a logical conclusion on my part. After all, my memory confirmed that an instant before, the Don Juan I know was holding me by the armpits. Therefore, the strange luminous object in front of me had to be Don Juan's face. There was a familiarity to it, yet it had no resemblance to what I would call Don Juan's real face. It's the reverse. Carlos is now actually perceiving Don Juan's real face. What he typically thinks of is not the real face. But anyway, it's the reverse here. What I was looking at was a round object which had a luminosity of its own. Every part in it moved. I perceived a contained, undulatory, rhythmical flow, as if it was flowing, as if the flowing was enclosed within itself, never moving beyond its limits. And yet the object in front of my eyes was oozing with movement at any place on its surface. The thought that occurred to me was that it oozed life. In fact, it was so alive that I became engrossed looking at its movement. It was a mesmerizing fluttering. It became more and more engrossing until I could no longer tell that the phenomenon in front, until I could no longer tell what the phenomenon in front of my eyes was. I experienced a sudden jolt. The luminous object became blurry, as if something was shaking it, and then it lost its glow and became solid and fleshy. I was looking at Don Juan's familiar dark face. He was smiling placidly. The view of his real face lasted an instant, and then his face again acquired a glow, a shine, an iridescence. It was not light as I am accustomed to perceiving light, or even a glow. Rather, it was movement, an incredibly fast flickering of something. The glowing object began to bobble up and down again, and that disrupted its undulatory continuity. Its shine diminished as it shook, until it again became a solid face of Don Juan, the solid face of Don Juan, as I see him in everyday life. At that moment, I vaguely realized that Don Juan was shaking me. He was also speaking to me. I did not understand what he was saying, but as he kept on shaking me, I finally heard him. "Don't stare at me! Don't stare at me!" he kept saying. Break your gaze, move your eyes away." Shaking my body seemed to force me to dislodge my steady gaze. And the reason for this is immersion, right? The gaze, the immersion, it's pulling Carlos in and he's losing overview perspective. And this is what to be avoided, right? We can easily get immersed. In life, we do this all the time. We get caught up in bubbles, right? We have to be very careful of this bubbleness, right? Uh, Apparently, when I did not peer intently into Don Juan's face, I did not see the luminous object. When I moved my eyes away from his face and looked at it with the corner of my eye, so to speak, I could perceive his solidity. That is to say, I could perceive a three-dimensional person. Without really looking at him, I could, in fact, perceive his whole body. But when I focused my gaze, the face became at once the luminous object. "Don't look at me at all," Don Juan said gravely. Oh, maybe that's not gravely. "Don't look at me at all," Don Juan said gravely. I moved my eyes away and looked at the ground. "Don't fix your gaze on anything," Don Juan said imperatively. "Don't fix your gaze on anything," Don Juan said imperatively, and stepped aside in order to help me work. I did not feel my steps and could not figure out how I performed the act of walking. Yet with Don Juan holding me by the armpit, we moved all the way to the back of the house. We stopped by the irrigation ditch. "Now gaze at the water," Don Juan ordered me. I just want to pause here to read Joseph's comment. Intergenerational trauma is so big for many of us. Yes, yes, yes. Way of impeccability. Almost every participant, yeah, has been the intergenerational trauma has been a big issue. There are ways to deal with it. A Way of Impeccability deals with it very profoundly. And in some of the cases, we were able to deal with the generation before, right? So we had the person and the preceding generation. And so both participating in Way of Impeccability. And this is very profound and very helpful, yes? And also sort of indirectly some with the generation following, right? Two generations following. So in one case, there's three generations involved. And we can deal with this. Way of impeccability is profound because it's a replacement, not a repair focus,
Yes,
right? Very big deal, right, Beena? Very big deal.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
And non-existence of or absence of replacement, we don't realize till we actually face that
yeah,
situation
yeah.
and
Right.
how big a problem it is.
Right, right, right. So the key is to shift and to shift your immersion into an alternative. And that's the key. Replacement, replacement, replacement. If you start fixing, you have to understand how the brain works. Because of emphasis. If you focus on fixing yourself, you're emphasizing on your problems. Your brain is wired now to be aware and notice and to be fixated on problems. And that's all it starts to see after a while. And the more you fix, the more you see problems, which is why people spend decades in therapy. It is sad, sad, sad that the psychological industry, the counseling and therapy industry, do not understand emphasis. And the more they try and fix, the more they actually perpetuate the brokenness, because you're emphasizing on brokenness, right? You have to understand this, and it's sadly not an understanding that's out there in general, right? It fascinated me as a boy. I understood this as a teenager, right? And this is like, wow, man, really, you guys are like making the thing worse, and it's horrible. Anyway, so we, in Way of Impeccability, it is starting fresh and clean with a replacement. And you build the tools, and through habit, through managing habit, and through language, right? Because language is so inherently connected to change and to how we are, and our self-description, our self-conception is massively important in how we change ourselves. So language, self-conception, all intimately connected. Change this, which is why the language of conceptuality, dictionary of power, is a fundamentally profound tool when combined with your self-conception and clarity of intent. It leads to profound change. You don't have to go fixing yourself and unplugging yourself and unblocking yourself. You just connect to your real self. When you realize that's an entire artificiality, you just drop it, you just let it go, and you build this new self, this alternative self. You don't even have to build it really, it's connecting to what's already there. The moreness is already in you, you just have to connect to it, right? And you have the tools to recognize it, which is what Way of Impeccability is. Language of conceptuality, dictionary of power. And they are mechanisms for recognizing the moreness that's already in you, right? So different way of coming at it, different way of coming at it. That's why, as you say, street kids who have intergenerational trauma, this whole thing is a non-issue when you shift the focus. It all just goes away, right? It's only an issue if you make it an issue. You have to be very careful. You have to be very, very, very careful of over-emphasizing trauma. Yeah, all those kids had lots of trauma, but there's not an issue for them. At least the kids who, like Don Juan and Don Gennaro, right? They came out of that environment, but it became a non-issue. Right? They didn't carry this trauma with them the whole life. Don Juan is not a traumatized person now, hasn't been for a long time in his life, because it became a non-issue with a shift of immersion and focus into the alternative, which is the warrior's way and living in this whole different way, right? So again, we have to be very careful, Joseph, of overemphasizing trauma. And part of superiority paradigm culture, which is worldwide, makes trauma into this big deal because there's a payoff for it in providing us an excuse for not being who we really are. Yeah, so I'm very cautious with trauma. We have to be very, very careful. And I try not to even use this term trauma. And I don't want to put a focus on it here, Joseph. It's inappropriate. It doesn't matter how much trauma you have. It doesn't mean that you cannot get out of it. Take Don Juan as the example, or Don Gennaro, or anybody in his party, or any of the other apprentices, right? Or any of the people in Way of Impeccability. I mean, some of them, sure, has come and spoken about the trauma in her life, but she does not have it any longer. And she doesn't even like to be thought of as a survivor, because a survivor, you're still connected to the trauma. She's no longer connected to it. She's a thriver, not a survivor. She's a different person. She's a different reality, right? So we have to be very careful, because if we have this focus on trauma, it's the emphasis of the brain. You are describing yourself as a victim, as a trauma victim, and that description trains your brain, and you make it worse, and you reinforce it, and you never get out of it, right? So we have to be very, very cautious of this, yeah? So all of this intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, yes, it exists, but that doesn't mean we cannot get out of it. We can. We can. A lot easier than the typical culture makes us believe, right? And because people want justifications for their nonsense. So they have this whole thing, right? They don't want to make the effort to get out of it, face the awful truths, etc. Right? So I'm very, very cautious with this. And I have experience. I'm talking from experience, not hypothetically. I'm talking from experience of people getting out of trauma. I mean, like, sure, written a book about it. You can go and read a book about it, right? And see, it's not just something I'm saying. I know this for an absolute fact. that once we start to understand the overview and understand emphasis in particular and understand replacement, yeah, then we shift. And when you start to have a replacement, the rest just becomes a non-issue. Yeah. But if you immerse in it and focus, of course, it's a major issue and it's severely traumatic and it's very stressful and it's a whole big deal. Get out of it. Say, right, the trauma was then, I'm going to start this whole alternative, which is, my new life, my positive life, Moreness, whatever you want to call it. I call it Moreness-Culture. Way of Impeccability is the toolbox, and that builds this Moreness-Culture, right? So there's a logic to what I'm doing, a sensibility and a sobriety. But this focus on trauma and stress and our problems, it only makes it worse. It grows it, and you train your brain to be victimized. And don't do that. Don't do that, right? So I'm not even going to read your whole long comment there, Joseph, because I don't want to be putting this focus and immersion on it. Yeah, because it just sucks you in and you make it worse. It doesn't help. It doesn't help. Right? Very important. All right, let's continue reading. Don't fix
Just
your.
wanna.
Oh,
I
please,
have a
Beena,
question
please,
about
please,
this. Yeah, because
please.
this trauma thing. Okay, of course. It, the origin of this word is wound. Okay, now we refer to emotional wounds, and the wounds. It was physical, and now it is shift into the understanding of emotional now. And when we talk about generational trauma, of course, we do carry a lot of things from our parents, like in our DNA. So it could be a possibility. I'm not sure 100% right now because the research is still going on, so we don't know. But people do claim that okay, it's a research now that okay, yes, uh, we do carry our generational traumas. So what is the difference between carrying a generational trauma? Because no one else talk about the privileges generations had. They also carry that. Do
Sorry,
the
repeat
do the
repeat your
do the
question. I got a bit
happiness. Okay,
distracted.
okay. Do the happiness and the blessings in their life, the feelings of that blessing of being blessed and happiness and all that, do also that carry over with generations or not? Because I always, whenever people talk about the
Exactly,
carryover, it's just
exactly.
a trauma. Okay,
Exactly. Of course, the positive can also carry over. It's all about choice, focus,
okay,
immersion. The
okay.
key to understand is to understand how the brain, the body works. Emphasis literally rewires the brain. Literally rewires the brain. So if you emphasize on trauma, your brain is going to be wired traumatically.
Hmm.
Don't do it. Don't do it. Emphasize something else. Replace it. Emphasize way of impeccability. Emphasize living with clarity of intent and all the other things that go with this, right? I mean, we've gone over way of impeccability much in previous lives, right? I mean, you can go look up the older videos, right? And again, if that's something that somebody wants to know more about, come and do the program, right? That's the only way to really know about it. I mean, this is a really, really
Okay.
major deal this to do this, right?
Because you know that okay, I was very interested in understanding that okay, how these things, other way of healing things. But what I have so far experienced, okay, of course my experience is limited, so I'm not claiming anything. But what I have experienced and I have just read about and heard about, all the trauma healing processes, uh, they generally, or you can say mostly, they are just two ways. First is a perspective shifting, although they don't name it as a perspective shifting. They just go into your okay, yes, I can help you to go into your past and think about it and then release it and do something else. They actually, even in the silver mindset training, they also say that okay, replace it with something else. They don't name it
Yeah,
precisely,
yeah.
but what they do is okay, now carry this young baby in your hand as your younger self, and then move from there and say that. And so all what they are doing, they are rewriting a new story in our memory. This is what we
Exactly,
are doing.
exactly.
Okay, other examples, people say okay, some spiritual people with help of other things, also some mediums, what they also say that okay, at that time you were doing this. Even the
Yeah,
generational trauma is to actually giving you some relief from your personal uh, suffering, that okay, oh, it is
Yeah.
something not your
Yeah.
personal only, it is something coming from other people. So it is a perspective shifting right there. When the term generational trauma, okay,
Yeah.
you're not carrying only your thing, but okay, it is someone else's also. Again, a perspective shift. The third thing I have seen that okay, some people are using frequencies, different frequencies in with the mediums of like music and other instruments, and of course drugs and everything. Whatever we are doing, at the core, at the root, there are only two ways to heal any kind of trauma. Either it
Right.
is
Right.
generational trauma or a personal trauma. Is to do perspective shifting, which is of course is a base of the replacement, rewriting a
Oh,
new story.
crucial. Crucial.
Yes. And also that some people say that okay, the new concept is that okay, you have energy stuck. Even for that an energy stuck,
Exactly.
what they do, shake your body,
Exactly.
some physical exercises, which you can of course you can do any time, and we all have to
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
something on regularly. You can start dancing, whatever.
Right. Right.
Releasing energy physically and emotionally, this is the only, so far this is the only
Exactly.
way to deal
Exactly.
with this trauma.
Exactly.
Either it is
Exactly.
personal or generational.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I have been thinking about, and I have been okay, in a limited way again, I am doing my research about that. Okay, what are the different ways of healing this? All the healing, if you will go so far, again, I'm not claiming anything as an absolute, but so far what I have read about and learned about is that releasing the energy. How?
Yeah.
Physically, by some movements of frequency, using some frequencies. And the second one is perspective shifting. They
Yeah.
don't name
Yeah.
it, but it's exactly this is what they do. Even spiritual people who are using like themselves as a channel or medium, and they share things, what they are doing, they are
Yes.
actually directing or communicating with your subconscious mind and rewriting a story, which we can also do this. Of course, it is not going to be as easy, as comforting, as special as someone else is doing something for me,
Yeah.
but we can do this.
Very important. All right, Joseph, I want to just take a moment here to talk a bit about me and where I'm coming from. You know, many who listen to me and through the years, oh, you know, you're a philosopher and all that. Yes, that's true, I am. However, in the modern context, I am much more of a psychologist than I am a philosopher. All my history, all my learning, all my studies in a more modern context was psychological studies and learning, and I created my own psychology, right? Uh, Much like any of the other psychologists do, right? But and I'm using this word psychologist because a psychologist is somebody who's following and applying a particular philosophy, or with not philosophy, psychology, right? Which somebody else put together. But you know, somebody like Freud was a psychologist, much like a philosopher, right? The creator of a psychology or psychological system. Yeah. Now, without really, truly, I'm not one to overestimate things, but my psychology is world class. I'll put it up against anybody's psychology. And for instance, this understanding of emphasis, which the entire psychological industry, right, for the most part, you know, over the decades now, it's starting to understand it now with neurology, but the psychological industry does not understand this. Yeah, and this, I mean, I understood when I was a boy. Right? So I'm saying that I have a very profound understanding of psychology. Yes, and I apply this when it comes to dealing with trauma specifically. All right, now let's go back into this. Yes, in terms of dealing with trauma, first we set up the alternative and make sure that there is a firm, solid footing in the alternative. Then, once you have this firm alternative, then you can go and look at the trauma. Why? Because you are looking at it from the outside. You can touch on it and you can deal with it and you can focus on it, but do so with an objectivity because you are coming at it from somewhere else. not from inside it. So the brain now is dealing with it in a very different way. When it's inside, you feel it, you experience it, and of course you get the emphasis. When you're coming at it from somewhere else, right, you now have the solidity, you can deal with it and touch on it and see it for what it is. And through perspective shifting, yes, there's a profoundness that comes about when we understand the greater moreness part of Way of Impeccability, when we understand what life is all about and how the world makes sense. We then start to make sense of our trauma as well. And this is transformational. You ask Sher now what her opinions are on the trauma. She's a very, very, very different view. And she's going to just show, for instance, right? But any of but the way that she relates to it now and understands it and appreciates her trauma. She appreciates her trauma. Doesn't even call it trauma. It was a gift. Right? Very different way of understanding this. But it's a gift that we have to go through. You have to go and you have to have the basis, the foundation, the vocabulary, the way of thinking, the language to be able to process this appropriately. Right? If we only have the language of trauma, it's all stress and bother and upset and terrible and horrible. We do not have the appropriate conceptuality to appropriately understand what's going on. When we have that, everything shifts, right? So I am really emphasizing, Joseph, that I have successfully assisted people in dealing with their trauma and make that trauma a non-issue. And they thrive now. They are thrivers, not survivors. They are not these victims. No, they can't even think that way because they are entirely different people. And their past has changed. They've changed the way they relate to the past. Yeah, it's very, very powerful. So I'm not just saying this stuff as theory and idea. No. And what I do is truly, truly profound and very, very revolutionary. Right? And it works. I'm not saying it as an idea. It's not theoretical. It's based on practical experience. Right? Practical, real experience. Yeah. So very, very important. Yes, it's not about ignoring anything. No, it does deal with it, but it deals with it appropriately with the tools in place, the mechanisms in place to understand exactly how it all works. Like I say, conventional psychology, traditional psychology does not really understand it appropriately, right? And our typical views of dealing with trauma and therapy, it's terrible. It just entrenches it, right? Doesn't really help. Yeah? So I'm not saying we must ignore it. I never said that, Joseph. So you say that to say we can just ignore is... I never said we must ignore it. Not at all. Absolutely not, right? So please pay attention to what I'm saying. I never said anything about ignoring trauma. Yes, deal with it, but first replace it with your solid foundation of realness and have the tools to be able to go and deal with it. Then you can come at it, and because you are able to perspective shift, you have overview perspective, you understand the bigger picture, now you can deal with it without it being traumatic. You can deal with your trauma in a non-traumatic way. This is essential, crucial, absolutely imperative. Otherwise, nothing will happen, right? Yeah. So I'm not saying anything irresponsible here. And plus, just keep in mind, what I am saying is coming from the basis of experiential value. I'm not saying this as a theoretical idea. I'm saying it based on having dealt with many people. Yes. Almost every single participant that came had severe trauma. I mean, really severe trauma. Yeah, just happened to be, right? Yeah. To get stuck anywhere in the process is not helpful. Exactly. That's the point. Because if you are dealing at it inside, you are stuck just by the fact that you are trying to deal with it from the inside. It's not going to happen. Yeah, the very nature of the way the brain works, if you try and deal with things like trauma from inside of trauma, you just aggravate it. and you entrench it, and you reaffirm it, and it just keeps going and going and going. And that's why you have generational trauma, right? And you have to deal with it from the outside. This is very, very key. Very, very key. Yeah. I'm not sure which baby's getting thrown out to the bathwater. I am saying, Joseph, that the usual ways and of thinking about trauma, dealing with trauma, and handling trauma, from just look at people. It takes them years and years and years, and they sit decades long. And do they ever really ever unhook from the trauma? No. They learn how to minimize it. They learn how to basically deal with the symptoms of it, but they never treat the trauma itself. It's like a cold and flu, right? We're always dealing with the symptoms. We never treat the thing itself. That's why colds keep coming back, right? It doesn't go away. There's no cure for the common cold. The same thing with trauma. We end up in most of the ways, the conventional ways of dealing with it, it's about minimizing the symptoms, not treating the thing itself. Way of impeccability and the psychology that goes along with it, it deals with the issue itself. It cures it, right? Doesn't minimize it, cures it, right? So, Joseph, the only way you're going to really know what I'm talking about is to actually come and do Way of Impeccability, right? And then come back to the trauma, and you'll see how it all takes care of it, right? Because now you're dealing it from an entirely different viewpoint, a different paradigm, a different perspective, and everything starts to make sense. And when it starts to make sense, life is easy, right? It all falls into place. You can ask Sher. Sher's a completely different person. Her life is now wonderful and magical. Why? Because of this shift, right? And not just Sher, the other participants also. Yeah, yeah. I'm not saying don't focus on it. I'm saying focus on something else. Understand what I'm saying, Joseph. I'm not saying don't focus on your trauma. I'm saying shift out of it to create something else, which is, in this case, Way of Impeccability. If you don't have that, of course, well, then you're just stuck in this unending loop that goes nowhere. As you know, yeah, this is something that's just, it's ongoing all the time. It doesn't ever get truly resolved. So I'm not saying don't focus on it. I'm saying shift your immersion into creating an alternative self, a replacement, right? And through the replacement, yeah, now you grow the replacement, and the trauma side of you disproportionately gets less and less, right? It doesn't go away necessarily, but it's not the prime focus. It doesn't immerse you into it. You're not thinking trauma in and day out. You've got other things to think about. And now when that part of you gets to be the main part of you, and trauma is the small part that does need to be dealt with, right? You now can deal with it objectively from the outside, right? So again, pay attention to what I'm saying, Joseph. Please do not misunderstand me. I'm not saying do not focus on it. Yeah, which if you only say that, yes, my words may be that, but it's in context to say shift your focus to focusing on something else, and then come back and do it. Understand the totality of what I'm saying, Joseph. Very, very important, right? Otherwise, you're going to misunderstand me. Yeah. Very, very key. Very, very key. Again, Joseph, what I am saying is coming from a position of experiential validity. Okay? I mean, your comments, they have a thread to them that indicates that I'm mistaken in some way. How am I mistaken about something that I have had multiple experiences of many, many times, of it working profoundly? Yeah? See? So take it in that context. What I'm saying about having dealt with people successfully with trauma. Really, really, really. And I have, you can go back and look up Sher stuff. I mean, Sher makes many posts. And you just follow Sher and you'll see this, right? You can read Sher's book as well. But, especially the more recent things now where she's really shifting. Yeah, just follow her post and you'll see what I'm talking about, right? It's not a theoretical point. I'm not making these points idly, and I'm not giving bad advice either to say, oh, no, don't focus on it. I am saying something really profound, but one has to shift out of the conventional mindset. right? And that's the key here. It's the conventional thinking about it that keeps it locked in. Yeah. So break out of the thinking. Break out of the thinking. Yeah. Hear what I'm saying beyond what you think I'm saying. Listen to what I'm actually saying. Yeah. I'm not saying don't focus on it in only, right? That would be no. That's to say don't focus on it without a replacement. That's just bad advice, right? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah, all exactly. All you say all psychologies need scrutiny, precisely. The scrutiny that has gone into what I do is off the charts. It's a lifetime of scrutiny. Yes, a lifetime of absolute. I would never, ever, ever, ever have attempted this unless my scrutiny was absolutely confirmed over and over and over beyond a doubt, right? So yeah, that's just part of impeccability and how I am. I never sought to do this. It was never a point to me. I never sought to be a therapist or a psychologist, to deal with and help people. No, I was just focused on my own thing, is learning and understanding. But I was so extreme in my own thing that this all got to be developed, and the universe pushed me into this. I didn't choose to do it. The universe pushed me into it, right? And again, I was exceedingly cautious in undertaking this. Way of Impeccability is not set up as a therapeutic program. That's a side effect of it. It's a side effect of it, right? It is about building your real life. Your real life. Trauma is an artificial life. It has real causes, but it's still an artificial life, right? That's why it's suffering. If you're suffering, it's artificial. Right? We don't need to suffer. We don't have to suffer, even if there are good reasons for it. It doesn't mean that this is the appropriate way of being. No, life isn't geared towards saying suffering is appropriate. This is a Calvinistic idea, which is horrible, right? No, life is about joy and moreness. Yeah, that's what life really is. So we have to overcome these misunderstandings, misperceptions, misbeliefs, which is all part of superiority paradigm, right? There's a big deal to it, Joseph, big deal to it. Again, don't believe what I say. Set aside belief and take what I say and go and test it. That's all I'm asking. But yeah, all of what I'm saying, not just part of what I'm saying. Yeah, all of what I'm saying. Like, again, I said to shift the focus from the trauma to something else, which isn't saying the same as don't focus on it, right? And again, to say, yes, you are going to not focus on it in the actuality because you're going to have your focus on impeccability. But it's not the entirety of what I'm saying. You're going to come back later when you've got a solid basis and you can objectively deal with your trauma from an appropriate understanding. You've got overview perspective, you've got discernment, you've got depth of understanding, you understand how the world works. You can really see it in the appropriate perspective. Now it shifts and changes, right? It's like, understanding. When you truly understand, there's nothing to forgive, right? It's the same deal. It's that overview perspective, right? So I'm not saying these things idly, Joseph. Again, just, give what I'm saying. Try it from a receptivity point of view. Assume it makes sense and see how it makes sense, right? But you first have to assume that it does make sense in order to be able to appropriately evaluate it within that context. You have to have that assumption that what I'm saying has got validity to it, right? And give it that thoroughness of this capital R receptivity to insist that it makes sense and treat it as if making sense, figure out how it makes sense. Then once you've given that, you're like, oh, I see it from an entirely different angle now, entirely different viewpoint. Then you'll be in a position to evaluate it fully, objectively, and appropriately, right? Otherwise, you're simply evaluating it from within the context of the bubble, and that's not really possible, yeah? We can't deal with things outside the bubble from inside the bubble. Doesn't work, okay? It's all filtered through the bubble, of course, right? And we get this distortion all the time, and that's what's happening. You're looking at my thing from inside the bubble, for in this case now trauma. You have to look at it from outside. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen from inside that bubble. This is what I keep saying. It's a very profound understanding of psychology and how it works, right? And this bubbleness is just not part of conventional thinking, conventional psychology. And same with emphasis and immersion, right? And it's horrible, and it leads to really lifelong perpetuation of problem that does not have to be so. Yeah. Now, of course, to shift into a new way of being, it's not something you do overnight. It's not like, oh, I'm going to hear one sentence and read one meme. No, it takes work and effort and discipline because you have to overcome habit, right? Way of impeccability addresses all of this. Habit is the big, big constant theme that is dealt with, right? Very big deal. The habit of thinking in our habitual ways, which are very limiting, very, very limiting. They keep us in that bubble. Yeah? And there are payoffs for it too. I mean, if you look up transition, when I at some point I think I did the entire little course. It's in the guide, right? I believe you can look up transition in the guide in group, or go to YouTube and look up on the things there, the videos on transition. And I go through transition, and the payoffs that people have for holding on to the things is a very particular part about it. We hold on to our problems, our issues, our stresses, our traumas, because they are profound payoffs. This is, again, my depth of understanding of psychology. Like I said, I'm very happy to put my psychology up against anything in the world. It's really, really sophisticated psychology. And it's because I'm an ordinary person doesn't mean that what I have isn't profoundly sophisticated. This is something very interesting as a takeaway, which of course, something I know, but something that was actually articulated expressly at Author Nation, the big author conference. And many of the authors there are, some of them are seven-figure authors, and they do Hollywood, and very successful. And some have been authors for a long time, written literally hundreds of books, right? They get the whole range there. All of them will tell you that they're regular people. Just because you're a regular person doesn't mean you cannot do things that are profound, that are depth. Any author that's written a book has done something profound, something out of the ordinary, something unusual, right? We all have this capability within us. And in my case, I was simply always connected to thoroughness, taking things through to the end. Anybody can do what I do and have done if you take it through to the end, right? So you don't have to be, we have this idea you have to be something special to do things profound. No. Ordinary people can do profound things. It's just a matter of getting focused on it and taking it through to the end. Like when somebody writes a story, they get started and immersed, and then the story tells itself, and they just finish it and complete it, right? Same thing when you're doing anything like developing a new psychology. I never had the brakes put on me because I lived in my own world, which is a very marvelous thing. I lived in the regular world and I lived in my own world. I had a social self and a private self. That no brakes allowed me to go through to the end, right? So it's nothing magical to it, nothing magical. It's pretty ordinary. At the same time, it is also special, right? Both together, right? But I'm just saying that we have this idea that somehow people that do things that are extraordinary are special and wonderful. All right, just take Freud and Jung and all this. I mean, when you look into Freud's personality, he's a massive BMN, but he was immersed and he followed through and he focused on it and he developed this thing through immersion, right? It didn't make his personal character something different, right? Anyway, I mean, again, we don't want to use Freud as the gold standard here. He just was the one who made psychology into something separate. By the way, before Nietzsche sort of started this thing of separating psychology and philosophy. Philosophy included psychology back in the day, so it was all together, right? We have to understand that at all. Yeah. So all I'm saying is, Joseph, that there are ways to deal with this. And I have these ways, and I can demonstrate it very easily, right? All you have to do it. Right? And it's different to the usual, but it's very successful, very effective, very efficient. Yeah. But you have to do it, though. That's the issue. You have to do it. Yeah. And the problem with the typical traditional ways, of course, they demonstrably don't work. You see people stuck in this years and years and years for lifetimes. They never get out of it, right? Which is, again, we have the generational trauma. It carries over because it's unresolved. unresolved, right? But it can be resolved. That's the point. Can be, right, Beena? Can be resolved. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. I have experienced that. Of course, not with that intensity,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yes, I know
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
traumas can be
So,
healed,
yeah.
because trauma is something,
Yeah.
when you name it, actually you give emphasis. This is how it is. It's a
Yeah.
very old saying that, okay, once you when you name something, you own it, like it belongs to you forever.
There
So
you
when
go.
when we
There
name
you
it,
go.
because it's an emphasis, and
Yeah.
I'm not saying that of course we don't have to name it. Of course, to deal with something we need to, and
Yeah.
but keeping it as a badge of honor, because I had a very minute, tiny little thing in my life, and I was carrying it as a badge of not honor, but it was something. It was kind of like a shield, and all the excuses. It was so traumatic that for years, whenever
Yeah.
someone just talk about it, I start crying like crazy.
Yeah.
Always, it was
Wow.
like never miss kind of a thing. And I was doing that, and it was happening to me. I was not doing it deliberately. It was happening to me, and it was very real for me, absolutely real. My whole career was ruined at that
Yeah.
time, and it was like, okay, my family was disappointed. I lost a lot of money, and of course a reputation, and also that I was completely clueless that what I'm going to do now. And that was the situation. In Way of Impeccability, it was an open wound for me. I used to say that, Sil, don't talk about it, it's an open. But what happened when I started doing that? I was never intended to actually, no, I'm going to heal my wound or no. No, it happened automatically for me.
Yeah.
Because once you are so empowered, once you have a piece of being, then you are able to see things in a bigger picture, that why universe was allowing all these things, terrible things happen to you. Why you were the one in that particular situation, in that specific situation, which means that you are not useless, you are not someone like really unimportant.
Yeah.
You had a very very important role in that whole situation, even though you were feeling helpless, completely unable to do anything about it, because things were so chaotic, so problematic, and everything was just happening, and you were just experiencing all these things. But even then, why universe put you into that situation? You had a very important
Yeah.
role there, and that it was the shift, that why I was, because we always ask that why with me, why to me, and I was asking the same questions. Why to me? Why I was there? That was the answer. I figured it
Yeah.
out by
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
It happens.
Uh, Very important also, to pay attention to the totality, right? Joseph, again, you focused on this, me saying not focusing on it. It's not what I said. I said shift the focus, yes, to develop the replacement. Then you come back later and deal with it. But first, you need to shift the focus to break out of the bubble of the immersion. So understand what I'm saying in the totality. If you only pick certain parts, you're going to lose the whole and misunderstand entirely what I'm saying. Very important. Very, very important, right? So please, please, please pay attention to the totality. Yes. I'm not saying irresponsible things, Joseph. I mean, just to assume that as like, wow, seriously, you know, I would never say things that are irresponsible like that. Never. Right? There's a deepness to what I'm saying, a very, very deep profoundness. Okay? Very important. Very important. All right. All right. We'll leave it on that note and we'll come back tomorrow and we'll continue. This is very exciting stuff. Very exciting stuff. Fun stuff. Fun stuff. But I would really recommend go over the view again, what I said, and listen with a different assumption of where I'm coming from, right? Again, I'm not talking idea, I'm not talking theory, I'm talking from experience, right? I'm talking about how this actually works and has worked for many people, right? Many, many people. Yeah, very profound, very profound. All right, brilliant. Beena, any closing thoughts before we go?
No, thank you so much, Sil. Thank you so much,
Brilliant,
Joseph, for
brilliant.
being here. And of course,
Yeah, we love it,
being part
Joseph.
that.
We love it. We love
Yes,
it.
we
We love it.
always
You know.
enjoy that. We always enjoy
Yeah,
it.
absolutely,
It
absolutely. You
adds a
know,
lot. It adds a
that,
lot.
that,
So, yes.
that's the point, Joseph. Just because I make an effort to share and about accuracy, it doesn't mean that I don't enjoy your comments. I do, because I understand communication, I understand perception, and I understand that when we're in a bubble, we grossly misperceive sometimes, right? So, but you sharing allows me to deal with the misperception. It's fantastic. So I love your sharing, Joseph. Absolutely, and Beena too. We love it. We love it, love it, love it. It's very profound. And to me, it's almost sacred, your sharing. It's a big deal. My appreciation is off the charts. Anytime somebody shares like this, it's a big, big, big deal, right? It's a very big deal. Just because we are not always grasping the whole, that doesn't mean that it's not valuable. Little by little, right? We start to see, we start to realize, oh my goodness, I'm seeing things from inside a bubble. And it's distorting, it's distorting, it's distorting. And then sometimes, even though you're not out of the bubble yet, you can start to make allowance for the distortion factor, right? I mean, it's like when you're underwater or you're looking at things that are underwater and you realize how light gets refracted, yes? So that when you understand that distortion factor, like if you're literally fishing with a spear, right? You can't stab directly where the fish is. You have to understand the light bends and the fish isn't where you see it to be, it's in a different place. And then you stab next to the fish or in front of it or behind it, right? And then you actually stab the fish itself, right? It's the same thing. We make allowance for the distortion, right? Like when you're underwater or looking through water, right? But when we're in a bubble, like in the bubble of trauma particularly, it's a massively distorting bubble, and it changes how we perceive reality. And that's why we want to get out of the water, right, to see things more clearly, right? Or go into the water, either way, right? You want to be aware of this. And the only way to really see things clearly is to get out of the bubble, right? Then you can start to deal with it appropriately. Yeah, yeah. Please, please, yeah, to the whole thing later. Wonderful, Joseph. Wonderful. By the way, while you're here, Joseph, did you ever get to see the email I sent you of the little video clip? You mentioned that you hadn't been able to find it, but maybe look in your spam or something, because I don't see why it wouldn't be there. In my email it says sent to Joseph. So yeah, I was curious to know what you thought of the little clip. It was very profound. It was very profound. It was a message from the universe. That's a big deal. It's a very big deal. All right, all right. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye bye, bye bye, bye bye, everybody. Very cool. Bye bye,
Okay.
bye bye.
Bye for now.
All
See you
right.
guys
See you
tomorrow.
soon, Venus. See you soon.